Alright, today we're going to address modulating. This concept is very simple. If you watched all the videos that's been on this channel so far, you've got a basic understanding of music theory. And we'll progress more and more as we go along. And some of these concepts we're going to address very basically, so that it's not complex at all at first. Later on, it might get very complex, but at first, if you can just get a hold of the basic concepts of what's happening there, any complexities in those theoretical configurations or theoretical theory, that, it'll be much easier for you to grasp what's happening. When someone talks about modulating, it's very simple. The biggest concept that the problem has been is the actual conversion during the modulation. Meaning, if you're playing in the key of C and you go to, here's the key of C, and you're going to modulate to the key of D, getting there, the transition, that is normally the issue, or the transition coming out of it. That normally is where the theory gets kind of blurry, because throughout history there's been lots of ways to do it, and you can study a lot of them. A lot of them can be very helpful. But most of the time it just boils down to what's consonant and what's dissonant at that period in time. Meaning, back in the Baroque period, that, you could do certain things in a modulation, or in some other time in history that something sounded good to them. And that was acceptable because of the type of music they were playing, and the structures that they were using. That can vary throughout history. So it normally just boils down to what sounds good to you. If you're going to change from the key to C to the key of D, and you're going to formulate some type of transition that might be a 1 chord for the transition, 2 chords going into the next key, 3 chords, that transition going into it, that being tasteful to where it sounds good to you, that is the key. That is the biggest thing you run into. Sometimes it'll be a very graceful transition. Sometimes it'll just be bang. Sometimes it'll be 1 or 2 notes or 1 chord, or it'll just bam, just jump right into another key for some reason. Or play the same thing that somebody was playing before, a melody line or a chord progression, and they'll just modulate it all of a sudden to another key. Or change key, down or up or something like that. And that's the very simple, basic concept of what is happening. And we've talked about key and scales and things like that. So the concept's very simple, is that you're just changing key when you modulate. You're changing to a different key or a different scale. A prime example of that is you're playing in C, all right? And you're playing along in C, and you're going to modulate to G harmonic minor. All right, that's not just another key, a major key that we're talking about. You've modulated to another key and scale. That scale denotes the key, basically. In Western music and the major keys and minor keys and the modes that come with them, it can be a little more complex or a little more simplistic. But when you actually change into a whole nother scale structure, that's a key unto itself, because the key denotes the scale structure, which denotes what notes can be used for melody, and also denotes what chords can be constructed from the notes in that scale to be able to play in that key. And it's that simple. So you might modulate, change key to something totally different. You might modulate into some Chinese 4-note scale or something, and the key of that for a little bit to do some little thing. You might be playing along in the key of D, and you do this little modulation with 2 or 3 notes, and all of a sudden you play, 8 bars of some Chinese little melody that's like only a 4-note scale that you heard or you picked up some little riff from studying music or something. And getting there, the transition, and getting out of that tastefully. And when you're getting in and out of that, you're starting out, like say in the key of C, and you modulate to that Chinesey scale, and with four notes in it, and you play a little melody thing that, that you heard or something similar that inspired you, and then you might modulate again into the key of D for a while, and you might modulate out of that into the key of F, and then you might roundabout way come back to C again. You know, those kind of things, it can get very complicated. Some experimental music and some extreme jazz can bounce around all over the place, you know, and you just be going, what the heck is going on? You know, and that, you know, when you understand the basic concept of what's happening there, where you can get lost is if you can't hear it, because a lot of times when you're listening to a modulation, it's, you know, you're listening to it, and it's not like they're going, we're getting ready to change to D, bro. You know, you don't know. So you hear this modulation without the music and it being notated well, that you're like, what happened there? I mean, he was playing in the key of C, and all of a sudden he did this little change, and, you know, that change was either using notes from the key that he was going to, or the key that he was in at the moment, or it's using notes and chords that aren't really the key that he's going to, modulating to, or the key that he was from. It can get complicated that way because there's really no set rule. If you're being strict theory, then sometimes there can be rules that will bind you, you know, where you can borrow chords from as you know, the transition from C to D or something. So you're playing along in C and you're going to D, so as you start to go into the transition, there may be 3 chords before you're actually in the key of D. You start borrowing chords from D, from C and D, to build the transition, and you're coming up into the key of D, into some chord there, some tonal structure that is going to be another basis of another progression or melody line that you have in mind for the whole reason of you modulating. And that can get very complex. So I want to make that very clear that it can be a very complex issue. We're not going to get that deep into it in this video. Just the basic concept of when you're modulating, you're changing key. You're either changing one of the basic keys, you're going from C to A or something like that, or you're going from a minor, E minor, to an F. It can be any of that stuff. The transition going to them can be the issue, and what's tasteful and sounds good. And also you can be modulating into a whole nother scale that's a key unto itself, like a 4-note Japanese scale that you heard this cool little thing from, and it inspired you to make this little melody. You want to somehow incorporate it into this thing you're doing in the key of F, but it basically sounds, you want to modulate it, and it's kind of in the key of G, but it's this 4-note scale that you're using the G as the root of the scale, but it's actually a 4-note scale, so we're only using chords and melody lines from that. And you might borrow some chords inside of that when you modulate to make it sound a little bit better. But that's the basic concept, and then the transition coming out of it back to somewhere, back to some other key or the key that you were playing in to begin with. And it's that simple. Don't get that concept confused in your head, because the basic concept crosses all those boundaries of how complex it can get, because that basic concept just can grow more complex. And the thing that normally grows more complex is the transition. When you're changing to another key, or you're coming out of another key back into the key you're playing in, or the transition going into another whole different key, those transitions are the huge key into doing that, doing it tastefully so it sounds good. And it's that simple. So keep that concept very simple in your head, so that later on when we start talking about modulating and what that might mean, that, well, no, I'm going from C and I'm going to modulate to G Phrygian, you know, and you're like, what? You know, G Phrygian, what do you mean you're modulating? Yeah, I was playing in C Lydian mode and I built this structure. Now I'm gonna modulate to G, you know, Phrygian. That can get really complex, you know, some of the concepts, and then my transition chords are going to be this, that, or I'm going to run this little melody line. Those concepts can be very complex, and we'll get into that more and more and more as we progress along. But I just want you to have that simple concept in your head, so when someone says modulating to you, that you don't get as a stupid look on your face and somebody just trying to explain to you that they're trying to smell the color 9. You know what I'm saying? So try to keep it that simple in your head, and then start, and if someone's talking about that, be worried about where they're coming from, what key they're coming from, what key they're going to, and how they're doing the transition from one key to another, and how they're getting the transition out of where they went and where they're going to. Those concepts are key for you to understand and work well with modulations. So, peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope I made the concept of modulating very simple for you to understand. So, as we progress along in these videos, that you have a pretty good understanding of what that means, and will have a better understanding of the complexities that can be involved in that simple theoretical concept. Peace, hope, love. See you in the next video.